So we're going to have a little fun tonight. After I'm done, you're going to go home, you're going to look up some of these things, and you're going to say, hey, you know what she was talking about. And you know what? Oh, well, find more. Give me more. So let's get started. So again, I hope tonight's presentation is going to be a little bit of fun. Let me tell you about the Narragansett Cook Gatsby chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. The chapter was started in 1991. What? That's only a little bit. The Narragansett portion, first name, Narragansett chapter was organized in 1895, and then you'll see the other Gatsby. Our chapter was organized by Annie Maria Randolph Hunt, because back then you had to have 5 names if you were born. She's buried at Old Fernwood. Annie had the distinct honor or pleasure or bragging rights to say that her great-great-grandfather signed the Declaration of Independence. So she started this chapter here. If you're around town, I encourage you to look at some of the plaques on the buildings. You're going to say donated, dedicated, everything by the chapter piece of the library in Kingston. You'll see a little plaque. We'll talk about some other plaques. I was driving down the road a couple of months ago over, where was I? On the tour of Rhode Island, so I'm going to tell you about a tree. So I won't do that. But I was driving down the road, and I saw a plaque that said Narragansett chapter of the DAR. So they're everywhere. So this is an Narragansett chapter tonight. At the end of my presentation, if you think you have a patriot, you can give me your name. I can look it up. And so if some of my friends here from the chapter right here, chapter, wait, and they can help you out too and see if you have a patriot. And hopefully I convince you or encourage you to have somebody else come join the party. The other thing I do, and this is all Russ Donato's fault, so blame Russ, and I told you I was going to blame you, Russ. I'm also the Washington County Commissioner for the Rhode Island Commission for Historic Cemeteries. Dory's here. She does her work with the cemeteries. That commission, I sort of took an interest in historic cemeteries. I've always been a little interested in historic cemeteries, weird enough, yes. But I sort of took a big interest during the COVID years. You know, COVID cemetery doesn't make sense, but it made sense to me. Because where do you go when you live in Kingston and everything's closed? Kind of wake up. I was like, what do I do? So I started visiting historic cemeteries and really looking around. As was mentioned, my degree is in American history. I concentrated in colonial and Revolutionary War history, so those were the cemeteries I visited. So if I was slinking through your backyard, I'm sorry. If I stopped short on the side of the road because I saw a cemetery, just swim around me, you'll be okay. And so that's how that started. So my presentation tonight is going to be a combination of the DAR and historic cemeteries. So how did I become interested in my time period? Like, who is interested, you know, from my early age at colonial American history and revolutionary history? I'm going to tell you how it's a tale as old as time. I fell in love. Right. 9 years old, I fell passionately in love. And I fell in love with this wonderful guy, Johnny Tremaine. Who knows Johnny Tremaine? I loved Johnny Tremaine. I watched that movie. I begged my mother to go out to get the book. I announced at the dinner table that I was marrying Johnny Tremaine, that Johnny and I would be together forever. My mother looked at me and she said, he's fake, Dad. I was like, oh, what did you speak of? You know, she said, he's not a real person or a character. He's fake. I was crushed, but it didn't crush my interest in this time period. So I sort of got over Johnny, did a little things, and then I became passionate about another thing, our beloved Patriots. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to meet the Real Patriots of South Kingston. So as you may or may not know, South Kingston wasn't the site of any major battles. However, we played a strategic and supportive role during the American Revolution to the people, our resources, and our coastal geography. People see the Revolutionary War as a ground war. British came, we fought them off on the ground. Much of the war was a maritime war, a water-based war, especially around here, and some of our bigger battles are around here. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. This town, a lot of things I did look up, and I was like, oh, I'm so proud of my town, Kingston. It served during the Revolutionary War as a place where the General Assembly met, and we did all this and we did that, and that's not true. You see? Yeah, just the General Assembly stopped meeting in Kingston by the time the Revolutionary War happened. Who cares? He was still important. They brought us up to them. They were in East Greenwich at the time. By the 1770s, South Kingston residents were actively involved in the patriotic organizing, responding to colonial resistance movements, and supporting the independence effort. So we always think of 1776, but the war started before then. The effort started before that. We were right on the cutting edge of the war. When I do this presentation, I also want you to think, when I say right on the cutting edge, remember what we were. Some of us still are. We were farmers. We were fishermen. I wasn't. They were farmers and fishermen. So they weren't highfalutin. They didn't have, billions of dollars they were trying to protect. They were trying to protect one thing. And again, that was independence. So let's talk. By law, men between 16 and 50, and this was a state law in April 1775, a week after the skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, the colonial legislature met in East Greenwich, not Kingston, broke my heart. So I'm going to say Kingston. Will I? What else? So in Kingston, and authorized the raising of a 1,500-man army of observation. So we weren't saying, oh, we're going to go in there and fight. We're just going to observe what happened. So Kingston, that army was organized into militia groups by law in all the different counties with county regiments and a number of town companies. Each town had a couple of companies. We had, talked about Kingston Reds. So we have no data about how many men served in each company. However, by law, only Indians, African Americans at the time, the register calls them Negroes, but Indians, Negroes, and Quakers were waived for signing up. So anybody between the ages of 16 and 50, you were mandated by law to train unless you were excused and serve when called. So they knocked on your door and said, hey, the British are coming. You were out there serving. Put your father gear aside and let's serve. In the 1777, Rhode Island military census counted about all the men between 16 and 60 who were eligible, and about 400 of the 85 men recorded came from South Kingston. Now we think of 400 now, we're like, oh, that's not too many. That was huge back then. That was huge, and the only people at that time that couldn't be counted, and we did have a large Quaker population. We had a large Native American population, and we had a large Black population of enslaved and free Blacks. So other than that, everybody else signed up for the war. Okay, let's talk about our team captain. Every good Patriot team needs a team captain. Let me be honest. Some of you are football fans? Yeah. I don't know anything about football. So when I wrote this whole thing, and you're like, she has no idea what she's talking about. You're right. But I do know the Patriots won, and I was excited for you. While I was watching the Golden Globes, I was excited for the Patriots. So let's talk about the team captain, Colonel Thomas Potter, commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Kings County Militia. I refer to this area because it's pre-revolution. We hadn't got freedom yet, so we were still Kings County. So you're going to hear me talk about Kings County and Washington County. And I try not to use South County too much. I usually use King and Washington County. It's sort of mixing them up. But right now we're talking about Kings County Militia. In May 1779, he served at the Colonial, the 3rd Kings County Regiment of the Rhode Island Militia, commonly known as the Kingston Reds. Under his command, the regiment was responsible for defending the town and defending the area. And by the town, I mean Narragansett and South Kingston. We were all one big happy family at that time. Did I mention that I grew up in Maryland? No, don't bully me yet, kind of thing. But I was one of you at one time. Okay. I'm responsible for regional defense training and readiness during the period of heightened British activity in southern Rhode Island. The Brits were hitting Newport. They were taking over Newport. There was talk about taking over the coast on our side of the coast, too. If you go down to Bonnet Shores now, you can see where the coastal, with the coast, they have the embattlements and things like that, right, in Bonnet Shores. Colonel Potter, like I said, that was formed, and while the Kingston Red didn't participate in any large-scale battles, their patriotic service did protect the community, did protect that coastal area, and secured resources and helped in the readiness for British coastal raids. So it wasn't a big battle, but we let the rest of the folks know when they were coastal raids. Colonel Thomas Potter, everybody talks about Thomas, his involvement in the war, great guy, but he didn't have any personal relationship or documented relationship with George Washington. The other one was that he housed George Washington in his home. and he did all those things. His home housed George Washington in his home. Colonel Potter was passed away by the time George Washington came to town. So he did not house him, but his house did. So we're going to give it to him. He did, however, serve us very well. Okay, let's look at, I should say, the Baba. This story belongs to Tracy and Elizabeth back there. We're going to talk about some of the big time patriots in this town that I learned of through my cemetery. And one of the people I learned about was William Lund, George Washington's father. So funny story. My compatriots here in the DAR said, you know, George Washington's barber lived in South Kingston. I got so excited. I was like, that's amazing. Because me history nerds get excited about George Washington's barber. So I had all these, I was researching, I Googled, I read, I found nothing about George Washington's barber. No offense, ladies, I thought, you know, a little crazy. Maybe they're pulling my leg. And then I found a story from Thomas Potter's daughter, wrote that when George Washington came to town, he was a mess. She said, had no wig on, which is, oh my God, there's no wig. And this was in 1781, by the way. George Washington came to town. He and his men were a mess. It showed up when some of his officers, I'm going to read what she put, some of his officers and his personal slaves. They had no wigs on, and Washington was dressed in faded uniform, patched at the elbows, and all the American officers were badly clothed. So in comes my friend George. George is like, dude, you need a haircut. And that's how he became George Washington's barber. His claim to fame was that one night when George was on his way, George Washington, when he was on his way to go visit Roosevelt to play the war, to handle some business in Newport, he gave him a haircut. George, which is amazing. George was he also served in the Reds. But remember, they didn't have any major battles, so he had time to cut hair. He gave him a haircut. George Lund died at 95 years old. He charged a little extra for his haircut by saying, hey, I'll give you a haircut to shave using George Washington's razor. So, George is buried SK20, the John Clark Jr. lot. Challenge for you guys. Where's George Washington's razor? Whose house is it in? You got to go through your basement if you live up near South Road, North Road, Cherry Lane, all those places. Find me George Washington's razor. Okay? And we can charge a little extra for a haircut. Some accounts maintain that even though the story from the Thomas Potter's daughter, who was Elizabeth Potter, she was age 11, she did say he and George and his sailors George and his officers slept in their house. Some accounts say he actually just visited the pub. I'm going with the pub, it's a party, right? So he visited the pub and slept nearby. London, like I said, became a local celebrity. All right, another thing is that no one knows. In March 1775, before the official establishment of the Continental Navy, the colony of Rhode Island authorized the creation of a small naval force to defend its coast harbors. Whose Navy? Because we were the first. Everybody else takes credit. This area was the first. Rhode Island was the first to create a Navy in the colonies. It was us. And one of my favorite people, not as favorite as Johnny Tremaine, but pretty close up there, I found out had a connection. So I hunted him down, and it was a long hunt, and I'll tell you why. Who knows who he is? Anybody know who Rathbone is? Well, he was the most competent sailor throughout the Revolutionary War. He was right under, who was the big sailor that everybody knows? Does anybody know? No. Something. I can't hear you. Yeah. John Paul Jones. He was the second in command of the U.S. Naval Forces under John Paul Jones. He commanded his own ships, and in 1778, he led the assault on Fort Nassau in the Bahamas, capturing the fort intact. The Bahamas were a huge point of supplies, point of support for the British Army. Obviously, they owned the British. The British Navy owned the Bahamas. So our friend, Captain John Peck Rathbone, from Kingston, sort of, captured that fort. He and his boat, the Providence, sailed in. They said, who goes there? And he was like, me, and he captured the fort. How many people died, you know? Any idea? None. Nobody died in that battle. Nobody on either side. He walked in and captured the major British fort. So let me tell you a little bit of how he ended up in Kingston. Because at first I wanted to believe he was from Kingston. He was not. He ended up in Kingston because he was offered a command on a frontier, in a privateer, and many of them, the legit pirates, came from Rhode Island, and he got captured. And they let him go. But they were like, dude, you cannot do this anymore. You can go. Where's go? He said, like any good younger brother, I'm going to go stay with my older sister, who lived in Kingston. And he came to Kingston, and he looked around, and he said, you know what I'm going to do? I know what these Kingston people like. I'm going to open a bar. So he opened a bar here in Kingston. He opened a bar in Kingston. Well, I call it a bar. I think they called it something a little bit nicer, called a meeting house or bar. He purchased what is known or was known as the Kingston Inn. Oh, okay. And he managed to call the Kingston Inn for about 6 months. But the boating life, the sailing life got to him, so he went back and was immediately captured again. And when he left his pregnant wife here with his sister, he went off to sailing, and a little bit later he was captured again. They said, we told you not to sail anymore, but here you are. So they shipped him off to one of my favorite places, Ireland. And then he was shipped off to Scotland, where he died. He passed away in Scotland. So actually, Captain Rathbone, John, is buried in Scotland, but his wife died in childbirth right around the same time, and she is buried also at the John Clark Cemetery. But it talks about on her stone, her relationship with her husband. She died giving birth to their child, and he died in a prisoner of war camp. Some things to consider about him. It's not a political statement. It just is what it is. He is still, well, we don't know about him, and we don't talk about him. He's still fairly famous in the naval world. And the U.S. has 2 ships named after him. He didn't get 1, he got 2. Here's the problem. They spelled his name wrong. Ain't that American? They spelled his name wrong. So if you're looking for those 2 ships, the name's spelled wrong. They spelled it Rathbone, Bourne. All right, so that's our good friend, Captain John Peck Rathbone. Everybody should know about him. He was a major war hero. And while he's not from Kingston, he was here long enough to open a bar. So we like him. All righty. Who's next? See my New England Patriots, whatever. Hapsing, Holistic. My favorite. My friends in the DIR know. Dory knows this is my friend Ebenezer. So if you were a friend of mine, and it drives my friends crazy, they'll say, what are you doing? I say, I'm going to go visit Ebenezer today. And I'm like, Deb, he's been dead 200 years. Stop. Or sometimes I call him Eb. So if you hear me say, I'm going to see Eb, this is who I'm going to visit. Major Ebenezer Adams. He's buried at SK 081, a Major Ebenezer Adams lot, which is funny, the lot's named after him, but he didn't own the property. The Potters did. So the question is, what's he doing there? Who knows? This is an amazing, funny story. People talked about his burial ground to me, and they were like, yeah, the DAR in the late 1800s put up a memorial to this guy, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Can you check it out and see if it's still there or what it looks like? And I searched, and I couldn't find the memorial. I might add the memorial's 20 feet tall, but I could not find the memorial. Across the street from my house, I could not find the memorial. I literally couldn't find it. Here comes Russ Donato again, saves the day. It helps the DA out, but it's all about me. It helps us find the memorial. So this memorial, you'll see that is an obelisk, 20 feet tall. Let me tell you a little bit about Major Ebenezer, as I call him, Adams. He served as captain of the artillery during the American Revolutionary War. He participated, this is big claim to fame. He participated in the capture of General Richard Prescott in 1777. Do you know when Prescott was captured? He was the head of the British forces in Newport. Ebenezer was so important to that raid. It was considered a raid, and I'll tell you about the raid, that he received commendations and a letter from George Washington himself. That's huge. George is a busy guy. He's got a want to fight a country to run, all things. To write a letter to you to tell you you agree, that's amazing kind of thing. So let's talk about the war. In July, it's the raid. In July 1777, while on Quintic Island, Newport, was under the control of thousands of British soldiers. So they were everywhere. Newport people were leaving or staying under British rule. General Barton, Commander Barton, who was the head of the forces, asked for volunteers for a dangerous and a secret mission, which is amazing that it was a secret mission because nothing's secret. But it really was a secret mission. And the plan was to capture Prescott. And be more like it can't be done. So picture this. They're in Bristol. And he says that, Barton says, we're gonna row over to, it was Middletown, Newportish area where Prescott Hawk is and all that in Newport. We're gonna row over and capture. And people are like, they're gonna know. They're not gonna know because they rowed over, remember, rowing. That's that exercise thing. Rowing from Bristol to Warwick. Some people are like, oh, they're just going back to Warwick. Then Warwick to Newport. And I'm like, what? What kind of things? Listen, you're South County people. How many of y'all pass the towers? Driving. Never mind walking or rowing. In the night. Barefoot. In the dark, in the cold. Past, what did we say? 15,000 soldiers was hanging around. So they rode over to there. They got there. There were about 40 men in the raid. They got there. The sentry said, who goes there? And Adam said, a friend. And he said, the sentry, and this is all documented. The sentry said, what friend? He said, oh, I'm too drunk to tell you. They went in, they captured Prescott and his aide de camp. Again, guess how many people died? Zero. Adams was not the person who was the actual captured, who did the actual capturing. The actual capture was by Colonel Bauman's enslaved person, did the actual capturing of Prescott. They rode him back to Providence, him in his pajamas, which is a little embarrassing because what do you think he slept in? Leave on both. All right, that's important. They rode him back to Warwick to Providence in his PJs, him and his aide-de-camp, and then ransomed. So the big time folks in the war, they didn't get hung, shot, whatever. They got ransomed back. And even the British said when they paid the ransom, dudes, that was miraculous. How you accomplish that is amazing. So what happened to Prescott? Anybody know? They put him back in Newport. So he was back in charge. He didn't fuck me one would. So anyways, more important, Ebenezer. So that's really what the monument says. Like I said, congratulations from the president of the, well, he wasn't the president then, but a handwritten letter right from George Washington. He is buried in your backyard. So I live off, I'll give you half it. I live off of North Road. He's buried at the Compass School. Here's the Compass School roll. You can visit his cemetery as long as the kids are on. And they will shoo you off that property so fast if the kids are on. And it really is, despite me telling you I looked for it for years, and I promise you I did, it's right on the edge of the property. But take a look, because in that cemetery also, you'll see this 20-foot monument. But there's also about 20 other soap graves there, some of the oldest in South Kingston, dating back to the 1600s. So take a peek if you have a chance. And while you're taking a peek, bring your clippers and your loppers and your rakes and do a little cleaning too. Okay. Good. All right. Injury report. There's always an injury. When I, once every 45 years, watch a football game, they're always like, well, here's the injury report. So I had to throw that in, but this is going to be kind of funny. So Dr. John Aldrich, this is my favorite. He is buried at Old Fort Fernwood. He also has a monument. I was walking around there one day, and I said, look at this guy with the monument, and this whole story's right there. One of the coolest things about a lot of these Revolutionary War cemeteries and grave sites is they write the whole story on them. So if you want to know about the person, just read the gravesite and they'll be like, Dad did this and he walked here and he built this and he married 14 wives and blah, 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 blah. All there. So anyways, John Aldrich has a nice monument. Dr. John Aldrich tells the whole story. Born in Prescott, Connecticut in 1760. Died in 1843. I'm reading all these accomplished. They're talking about he was a major military surgeon during the war, and he did this and he did that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, sort of leaning on John, although you're not supposed to. I said, he did all that at 16? He was like the chief surgeon at 16, 17 years old? Not quite, because even back then, you couldn't be the chief surgeon at 16 to 17 years old. One of the things I want you to keep in mind when I tell this story is back then, people were doctors while they were physicians. They weren't. Doctors and physicians were not the same thing. So when you read doctor, don't assume it's a physician, and I did, because I'm a 20th century girl. You don't become a doctor unless you're a physician. Doctors are the people in your neighborhood that you just started calling doc that helped you out. You know, he took off the splinter from your finger, the bullet from your butt, whatever it is. That's what a doctor did. Physicians were learned. Physicians went to college. They went to school, kind of thing. So a physician could be a doctor, but a doctor wasn't necessarily a physician. Did that at all make sense? Okay. Something to keep in mind. So I let him go. So I said, well, he was still a doctor at like 16 or 17? All right, we'll go with it. So I talked about his career. He sailed on many ships. He serves as ship's doctors. And then guess what happened? He was captured. It happens. He was captured. I want to talk about where he was captured, though, because this is important where he was captured. He was captured and sent to a ship called the prison ship, the Jersey. Does anybody know anything about the prison ships? I want you to think about the smallest Black Island ferry. Think about the size of the smallest Black Island ferry. Two floors. The prisoners stayed on the bottom floor. Its lift is a good word. It's not the best word. Think about you and 1,500 of your compatriots living on this prison ship docked off to New York Shore. No food, no water. If your friend died, he lied there until somebody saw him. So you could be chained, lying next to him, dead soldiers. He was on the prison ship, the Jersey. They estimate, and it has to be an estimate, because remember, people died, they didn't keep track. They estimated about 11,000 prisoners died on the ship alone. These prison ships dotted the coast. They called the ship Hell, the boat to hell. So just think about, when you're thinking about here, if he was 16, if he was older, whatever, he's on this prison ship. He was on this prison ship for a couple of weeks. And then, I'm going to go back so you can look at him. Then he was, if you need to see him, then he was paroled off the prison ship. He came home to Kingston. Not really, he's from Connecticut. He came home and went right back out there. Right back out. Guess what happened? He got captured. He got captured again. This time, he was captured and sent to Kingston, Jamaica, where he remained to the end of the war in charge of the English hospital there. So back to the fact that he was 16. So I'm like, okay, so he was 16 years old, a ship stopped, they captured, survived the Jersey, got captured again, and then made chief surgeon, chief doctor, whatever, in Kingston. Don't think he's 18 by then. Who is he, Doogie Howser? But it doesn't happen. So again, research, looked up, he was not born in 1760. He was born in 1749. But he didn't write his own epitaph. His great relatives did that. So a little research. But you're going to read stories like that when you read them, and you're going to think to yourself, you might not, because you might not be a super history nerd standing in the middle of Old Fernaway at the lunch hour and thinking about John Aldrich, Dr. John Aldrich. He then, after the end of the war, came back from Kingston. He came back to the colonies, which were now states now, and he moved to Kingston and became the town doctor. What did I say? He was the town doctor. Nobody ever claimed he was a physician. He was always referred to as a doctor. Right. So here's our jersey. And just if I just can't pick, I can't, when I think about the jersey, I'm amazed that anybody survived it. Because remember, you might be floating on the water, but you're not drinking it. And there's 1,200, 1,300 people lying around there with, all right, this is my favorite guy coming up. So, fielding his own team. Again, my Patriots picture, I don't know who was that supposed to be a cartoon, but I liked it. So, I used it. My favorite, James Barber. He is buried at the Moses Barber Lot, and that's over in West Kingston, not too far from where I live. What is it near? Yes, thank you. See, I was trying to think of what Dunkin' Donuts it was near because I'm a Rhode Islander, and that's the only way I know how to get any of that. Is what the Dunkin', which Dunkin' Donuts is on the left or the right? Yes.
Peter Potts.
Exactly. Exactly. There's no Dunkin' Donuts there.
No.
So you've not hear that often. But James Barber, why do I love James so much? Gentlemen, here's why I love James so much. He had 33 kids. He had 33 children. He and his Benoit, he had so many kids, he didn't remember their names. He said, I know someone that fought in the war with me, but couldn't remember which ones. I love that. 33 kids. 3. So that's still a decent amount of kids per wife. It doesn't really break down. I'm just fascinated with the fact that he didn't know his kid's name. How many of you parents didn't know your name all the time? Because my mother would call me Justin, who's my brother, all the time. Actually, I'm down. She'd be like, you know what you are. That kind of thing. So he had 33 of them. 33 with 3 wives. He was married in 1748, 1757, and 1768. So more than likely his wives died in childbirth. He lived 33 kids and counting. He lived to be the age of 95. So, good job, James. He spent about a year guarding the Rhode Island shoreline during the war, and then saw action in the Battle of Rhode Island, the Battle of Newport. He also saw action in some other places throughout New England. He was at the Battle of Newport in that area for about a month when he was wounded in the thigh and sent home. But he decided, I'm not done. I'm not done fighting for the freedom for my 33 kids. So what he did for the rest of the war is he returned as captaining his own ferry, bringing supplies and soldiers to the field. So he ferried supplies that then went on to soldiers in the field. And like I said, he had sons that also served, but he couldn't remember who they are. So if he couldn't remember, he died. But he knew they were there. At least a couple.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Hey, you. I'm telling you, my mother couldn't remember 2 of us. Never mind, there's Drake. But the first time I looked him up, I was stoned. I was like 33 and counting. I say in counting because who knows? Maybe, back then, let's be honest, if you had 33 kids that lived, you also had a number of kids that didn't. So it's a period. The other thing that you'll notice about some of these gentlemen, despite the war, they lived a long life. And people are often surprised how long people assume people in that time period didn't live long lives. And what I tell people when you research that time period is you didn't die from an injury, any kind of injury, whether it was on your farm, whether it was in war, and you didn't die in childbirth, where they died in childbirth. And you didn't die as a child. You lived forever. Because they're all living to 85, 95 years. It's that good old South County air, that farming and that maritime stuff. So, all right, however on time, because I told you I could go on forever.
Can do it.
Okay, still good. All right, this is what I think is important. Also, we also need to talk about some of the enslaved and Native American people that fought in the Revolutionary War from this area. This area is South County, Washington County, Kings County, had a lot of plantations on it. People are surprised. I don't know about you all, but I did learn at the school a few years back. But we had a lot of plantations on it. And at one point, General Washington ran out of soldiers. And he was like, each state has to give me more soldiers. And he set a quota that each state had to supply soldiers. Rhode Island didn't have it. We didn't have any more people. So our state legislature petitioned George Washington and said, hey, can we send our people of color? I'm sure they weren't that polite, but can we send our people of color? What people think about this, when they think about this, they automatically assume these people, these African Americans that were enslaved, these Native Americans, they signed up and fought this war for their freedom. Many of them were sold to the state. They fought instead of their owners. We'll talk about that. So their owners said, this happened in the Civil War, it happens. We don't want to fight, but we'll send you so-and-so. At that time, these enslaved people, whether they were African American or Native American, were sold to the state of Rhode Island. State of Rhode Island purchased them and said, you will fight for the purchase price, and then you could possibly be free. No, it wasn't a promise of freedom. It was a possibility of freedom. Okay. So let's talk about a few. To understand a slave flight, it is near SK 092. I say near because that is one of the things I like to talk about all the time when I talk about cemeteries. A sort of serious part of my conversations when I'm talking in front of South Kingston audiences. We have cemeteries everywhere. You drive by them. There are over 400 documented cemeteries in South Kingston. About 100 or so of those are now considered missing. That means people have built their houses on them. People have dug them up. How many of you know the movie Poltergeist? Come on, you saw Poltergeist, the kid got sucked into the TV? Go ahead, build your house on a cemetery. Go ahead. Don't turn the TV on, because that's what happened. Now, every time I think of that, I think of that TV when they're like, we come to the light. I'm like, don't come to the light. And if you built a house on a cemetery, well, no, whatever. But if you knew it was there, then you see, don't go to the light. Do not watch TV in the basement, upstairs. So many of our enslaved people were buried here, and their cemeteries are gone. The houses are built on them. One of this Garden Estate, the slave lot is what it's called. It's in both North Kingston and South Kingston, August 34. That was considered, I'm going to say, I want to believe it's there somewhere, we just haven't seen it. That was considered the largest burial of enslaved people in New England. Mm-hmm. At the time it was last recorded, in the early 1900s, they recorded about 160 graves. And then people went out years later in the 60s or whatever to find the cemetery, and they can't find it. So, unfortunately, we know of at least 3 former patriots that are buried there. They include Thomas Gardner, Butter Gardners, and Hercules Gardner. They also fought in the 1st Regiment. They were documented as fighting the full war in the 1st Regiment and coming back to Kingston. The people of Kingston, when they came back, we were broke by then. These were enslaved people. We were broke by then. So what did they do? They became destitute, wandering around the town. Old men wandering around the town. What the town did do, and it again is documented, is they paid to have them buried, a Christian burial in this lot that's no longer there. Keep in mind, for many of the people who were enslaved, Native Americans and African Americans, after the war, they really had nothing to come back to. And they did not receive pensions. So they just came back and hoped for the best. The people of the town, they paid a burial, but they didn't wander around the town. And at that time, the town also had a law that did not allow people to wander around. Everybody had to have some place to be. But these were the 3 gentlemen, at least 3. These are the 3 documented gentlemen that were buried in that cemetery that were documented fighters in the 1st Regiment. So, the other thing I want to talk about is the SKA. When you look at the Rhode Island Historical Cemetery Commission website, if you see SKA, that means the cemetery is no longer around. I don't know why they picked A, but I'm down with it. Okay, that means they can no longer see cemetery. This cemetery, SKA 10, was the Babcock slave lot. It was off of Tuckahoe Road. And there were 2 enslaved people that were documented fighters in the 1st Regiment that were Babcock slaves. Again, we have another Caesar and another fighters. How do we know they were in the 1st Regiment? Because we have the paperwork from their former mistress, who was Martha Babcock, who wrote to the pension department after the war about her enslaved. She puts, Caesar was a slave to my said husband before the Revolutionary War, and he served as a soldier in the militia for my said husband's place. So remember I said a lot of these soldiers were the place of homeowners. And he was with the army commanded by General Sullivan to act against the British in the Battle of Rhode Island. Privates who enlisted in their regiment at age 38 served the whole entire war. Neither one of them ever received a pension or official recognition until they were put on the Patriots Monument in Portsmouth. So they both served in the place of the landowner, property owner, served the full war, including major battles, but never received any recognition. On a positive note, Martha did try to write, but they did not receive the pension at all. So again, you had hope that they were welcomed back to farmland or whatever they were doing before. Any questions? Go ahead.
I know that somebody in my way back, they paid somebody to go to war for them. The person that worked on the farm somewhere, New Hampshire, from the state, they said, yeah, you go to my place and I'll pay you right now up front. You go for me and I'll stay back.
That happened a lot. These gentlemen, they weren't paid, they were sold. But there were a lot of, I don't want to call them serfs, indentured folks, people that owned the landowner's property, that worked their farmlands, things like that. That was in fact the case. They were paying to go. No less, Patriots still fought, but they didn't necessarily always fight by choice. They might have fought by choice when they got there, but they didn't often start off by getting there. Any other questions? Remember, just yell aloud, because if I put my glasses on, I can't read my notes. And if I don't have my glasses on, I can't see you. So, go ahead.
I saw a lecture on the Roger Williams gentleman reenacting guy, and there's a there's a teacher there. Her doctoral programs, she did all her studies, is from England, and did all her studies on Roger Williams. So these two were together in Jamestown on a Lenny series, and I listened to it, and I have pictures of me.
Excellent. Like I said, the Roger Williams interpreter is amazing. Okay, let's talk about what we can do. So, there's so many more. Remember, I said there were over 800 Patriots. Not everybody's buried here, but there's a lot of people to go. So if you guys have all night, I got all night. We can do all 800. No? Okay. Now, what is today? Today's Wednesday. The Patriots are on, but the Celtics might be. So, okay, let's talk about this. This SK-17 Gardner Teflon. That's where I'm going to sort of hang off on you guys and answer any questions. This lot right here is a lot of Gardner Tef. It is located in Tef Farms, in the woods behind Tef Farms, near Joshua Tef off the bike path kind of thing. It is a major, an amazing cemetery. Gardner Tef is one of those people I talked about. He served the full war, the full time. He enlisted day one and served through the full war. He was a farmer. He wasn't even, yes, he was a Tef, but he wasn't the landowner. He was a farmer. So I just need you to picture this farm guy signs up. And it's not like he signed up and jumped in his pickup truck. He signed up and jumped on his feet and walked wherever, and then walked around at least the eastern part of this country, fighting in every major battle. About a year in South Kingston. Lifelong came home to South Kingston and went back to a sheep farm. He was a sheep farmer. So one of the things that DAR, what we try to do with the Daughters of the American Revolution and recognizing folks, these patriotic soldiers, is one, we do cemetery cleanups. We've done a bunch of cleanups over the last couple of years here in South Kingston. We also spend some time flagging cemeteries. So we don't know about the veteran cemetery. One of the things Jim Reisel, who is the superintendent of the veteran cemetery, said he would love for us people to stop flagging the graves of cemetery veterans in the community. So we can flag the ones on the side of the road. Can you flag the ones deep in the woods? That's the thing. When you're going on your lights, bring a couple of flags and flag those cemeteries. Make sure they're well kept. If they're not well kept, contact the cemetery commission, and we can try and work to get volunteers out there. So DAR has done cemetery cleanups. We do the flagging. People in this community are doing flagging of cemeteries, and they're finding Revolutionary War patriots that they did not know. There's no records that they fought, but bam, they're there. And one of the key things people think is everybody is in the DAR register. I thought everybody was in the DAR register. Not everybody is in the DAR register. You're only registered patriot in the DAR register if your ancestors registered you. Guess who's not in the DAR? George Washington. He is not, you can look him up in the DAR. He is not there. He didn't have any kids. No kids, no ancestors, no registry. But many of us did. Many of the people here. I am in the DAR. Although, funny enough, I found that out after my grandmother passed away, and her whole family, like every member, dated some ancestors. I was like, she hid that from Mrs. Tremaine. That's me. She hid that information from me. So I encourage you to do some veterans flagging, some cemetery restoration work, other things the DAR is doing around town. And if you're interested in joining and determining whether you have a patriot, let me know. But we do commemorative events. This spring, we did the ringing the bells across America, which was the ringing of the bells at the time they signed the Declaration of Independence. That was in September. Geological work. We're at the libraries and help people do geological work. We do a lot of celebrating and supporting for veterans. We work really closely with URI, Student Veterans Organization, food bank things, all different things that we're doing. A lot of historic preservation, participating in the SK USA 250 skirmish. Is actually I keep saying skirmish. It's a skirmish. That we'll be there and doing some other things with SK 250. I told you about the history. Membership means you need to be a descendant of a patriot. Doesn't have to be a Rhode Island patriot. Doesn't have to be South Kingston. Just has to be somebody who was around and helped the cause during the Revolutionary War. Gentlemen, that does not leave you out because there's a Sons of the Revolution organization that you can also join. Questions, concerns, issues. Deb, you're full of it. You know nothing, or Deb, you know everything. Go ahead.
Where can you find a list of where the maps are?
So you can do a couple of things. The Rhode Island Historic Cemeteries Commission has a website. So one of the things you can do when you go to that website is you can go to cemeteries by tier, and you look up SK. One of the cool things I like, and it is not complete, that's our job, to get it complete, is you find the cemeteries and it will tell you a listing of who's buried there or who we know was buried there. And sometimes it will say revolution, civil, and you'll know that they were for that war. But like I said, one of my cemetery rules is no matter where I go to cemeteries, and yes, I go to a lot, I always choose one person to do some research. I look for that time period because that's where my interests are. But there's some other cool stories. Someday I'll tell you the stories when I met Theophilus Wales in West Greenwich. And because, Dory's like, oh, not Theopolis again, kind of thing. So there's a lot of cool stories in the cemetery. So that's what I encourage people to do. Yeah.
Could you explain what those lot numbers are?
It's property lines, property lots. So they just, I don't know any idea how they got numbered? Dory? Russ? Would somebody just make it up? I could just lie and say they made it up.
Or is there anomalies?
Oh, Dory believes it's the order they were found. Dory Wagner over there is, if you want to help her out, she and her crew are doing an amazing project for the 250th, is they are cleaning all the 250 Revolutionary War veteran cemeteries in Exeter and Richmond. And we went there Sunday, and I was admitting to Kenny that I did the work for a little while, was exhausted, and trudged through the mud, got back in my car, went home and go to sleep, and I know Harry was still there working. So, do you feel free to join?